Star Trek Enterprise Season 1, Dear Doctor, an episode I thought was going to be really dull and then was quickly realized quite interesting. Like, comment, subscribe. Let's discuss the episode. Thank you. Welcome to TrekTrav. My penis is now an innie. The episode starts off, and I knew that because it was called Dear Doctor, that it was going to be about the Doctor sending a letter to Mr. Lucas, who's on Denobula. I knew this. I didn't realize that this episode introduced a crewman Cutler. It introduced sort of Dr. Phlox observing humanity. We get a nice few moments of him watching a movie. Why the movie is from like the 1920s or 1930s is strictly because it's cheaper. I wish that they would have picked something more modern, but budget-wise, obviously, it saves a little bit of money. But just a really great scene of him looking around like, oh, I'm observing this, Trip tearing up. Don't understand. The scene on the film wasn't particularly teary-uppy, but we'll take it anyway. He's eating popcorn. We get him feeding his animals at the beginning and sort of talking to them. It's a good sort of, it's been done before. Data's Day is an example. Ways to sort of express who this character is without sort of doing another story, sort of telling his inner monologue. He talks about how like Hoshi's learning a new language. He's crewman Cutler, who's introduced in this episode, played by Kelly something. Their relationship is really good. It's sweet. She's a great actress, and she was a fan favorite later on. Sadly passed away much later on, but was a really good addition to Enterprise. Hoshi and the Doctor talk about how they're flirting together and how it's different. And then we get into the main crux of this episode, which is they come across two aliens on a ship. They've been traveling for 12 months. They're sick. They are dying. They are ill. And they basically say, look, we need help. Our planet has got a pandemic or an epidemic, and our species is dying. Can you help us? And Archer immediately jumps to, okay, let's go. Dr. Phlox sort of goes, it's interesting that they're so just willing to jump in and help straight away. That outside alien perspective. When we arrive at the planet, we see that, actually, I want to talk about the universal translator again. So Hoshi's standing there. She's getting a little bit of language from these aliens, and it's not English, and a little bit more and a little more. And eventually the translator sort of catches up with Hoshi fiddling with it. And it's really good to see. It's just that little nuance of this technology isn't the same as Voyager or TNG or Deep Space Nine, that it's still growing and it's still changing. It hands down makes this a really fun sort of moment. And it makes Hoshi look like she's more involved. I think later on it sort of gets pushed to the back burner because it's easier, but it's these little things in Season 1 of Enterprise that really make Season 1 of Enterprise an interesting watch. This episode in particular. So we get down to this planet. We find out that 1 in 3 of this certain group of humanoids is dying of this disease. We find out there's also another group of humanoids called the Mink who live on the planet as well, speak a different language, and they're supposedly less intelligent than the main humanoids. And what we see in this episode is an escalation of the information. So the Minks aren't affected by this disease. So Phlox and Cutler and Hoshi go to study the Minks to find out why they're like this. They realize through some observation that the Minks are more intelligent than maybe they're perceived by the other humanoids on the planet. And Phlox points out that humans are empathizing. They think they're being treated badly because they're sort of used as slave labor and they're given food and stuff, which is true. But Phlox points out that most other humanoids with more than one group of humanoids, one of them has made the other extinct, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals. So it's an interesting sort of separate taking a step back. we get to a point where Phlox is sort of investigating. They find out that this is a natural progression for the species. The minks are getting more intelligent. We find Phlox sort of argues with it and debates it a little bit. And so that he sort of, you can see that he's not quite sitting there well. Archer gets asked to come down to the planet by one of the original aliens that they found, who asks him for warp drive. He goes, warp drive, we can get to help faster. Give us warp drive. It won't take us a year to find someone. And you see Archer sort of grappling with the depths of that, giving up that natural first step to the interstellar community. And you see him, he says to Phlox that he said he'd think about it, but he doesn't actually say that. He sort of avoids it, taps the guy on the shoulder. So this species now has asked for a cure and has asked for warp drive. We have other colonies on the planet, plus ships coming up thinking they already have a cure, asking for help. And Archer talks to T'Pol about what this means. And T'Pol brings up a point. They went to Earth in First Contact, and they've been there ever since. You can't stay there. You're going to stay there forever and help these people? You can't do that. It's not realistic. And not that it's not realistic. Archer honestly considers this, and that's part of the naivety of Archer, but also the kindness and the big-heartedness of Archer. And this point by T'Pol is very important. Are you going to stay forever? Are you going to put in 100%? Because that's what you need to do. That's what the Vulcans did, more or less. And he also goes and he speaks to Phlox. Now, Phlox is, I don't know. Phlox is doing the studies. He's figured stuff out. He speaks to Archer. He knows how to cure their pain. And after some discussion, he admits to Archer that he has a cure. He can cure them, but should he? Should they stop? It's not a disease. It's just a biological, evolutionary thing. They're genetically just dying out. And the minks are genetically getting smarter. So should Phlox give the cure? And Archer goes, we should help out if we can. I don't care about evolution. There's people, they ask for help, we should help them out. And Phlox says, but who are we to do that? The mink need an opportunity to grow and thrive. And this is what the other species dying out gives to them. And it's interesting because Archer's adamantly against it, adamantly. And Phlox, although ambivalent and a bit cross thoughts about it, doesn't want to give Archer the cure, but tells him about the cure and pleads with him to make the right decision on not actually, not giving them the cure because it is natural evolution. It cuts to another scene. And it's interesting because all this time he's talking to the Dr. Lucas, and he's expressing his feelings. And Archer comes in, and Archer goes, "I've been thinking about this all night, and when we go out into space, we need to come up with a cure. We need to come up with a philosophy or a directive on what to do in these situations. We can't just blanket give people this stuff where it's their natural evolution." Alluding to the Prime Directive. I don't know if the Prime Directive necessarily applied here, but certainly they were not at the point of warp drive and they couldn't discover a cure themselves. I don't know how not helping them helps. At the same time, it's a mixed bag. You might feel differently than I feel. I feel like he probably could have helped. He shouldn't give them warp drive. It's just one of those things. Phlox ends this conversation with Archer because Archer clearly doesn't want to do that. And we see Archer talking to the aliens on the planet with Phlox behind him, saying, we've got this medicine which will take away some of the pain for like 10 years. we've given you these instructions on how to make it. The guy asks for warp drive, and you see in Archer's face that he's sort of struggling with it. It's a deep, he wants to help, but he knows that it's not the right thing to do. And he says, we can't give you warp drive. I'm sorry. He actually just says, I'm sorry, but you get the general gist. And it's that fabric, that Archer making that difficult choice, which truly makes him a captain. It's a choice that our other captains have had. It's a choice that they either break or they uphold the prime directive, non-interference. And Archer doesn't have that directive, but he has to make a choice. Do I play God with this planet? Do I make this species survive if it's detriment to this species? Do I give them warp drive and the ability to go look for help themselves, even though they haven't achieved antimatter yet and they haven't achieved these things? We do find out this race has met people like the Ferengi and other species who've come to their planet and not really helped. And the whole point of this episode, although it seems like a small little doctor sending emails talking about his wacky life, it's a much deeper episode. We also learn a ton about Dr. Phlox. We learn that on his planet, he has 3 wives and they each have 3 husbands. We learn that there is a district on there which has some crazy shit, of which you shouldn't go into unattended without someone to help you. And it's like, well, is Denobula just one big sex planet? But then, apparently, Denobulans don't like being touched, which makes no sense if they're big whore planet, which I found funny. So the relationship with Cutler and Phlox sort of grows, and to Paul, giving a lot of advice this episode, basically turns around and goes, you might be just flavor of the month. She wants to sort of explore aliens. And Phlox sort of doesn't take this seriously, but he does go and talk about the different cultural differences. This is while they are working with the minks earlier in the episode, and Phlox sort of explains that his culture is very different. The way he does things is very different. He's got 3 wives, they have 3 husbands, and that to them, relationships are different. Cutler admits that she has affection, but says she just wants to be friends. Is she implying that she just wants fuck buddies? Is that what she's implying? I'm pretty sure that is what she's implying, which to me is very progressive for Star Trek, to be fair. And Phlox sort of just goes, let's see what happens. And Phlox very much, actually, Cribbit Cutler was in the episode where the guy got attacked by the leaves. Ignore me. But it's a really interesting, this whole episode in terms of learning more about Phlox and the Denobulan culture and the way of things, learning about, like we learned about their mating season in that there's 1 million babies and somehow they have to be detached when they're connected. And we learn a ton about sort of Archer's mind and how Phlox works as the Doctor, and this really interesting way that Archer has to kind of make up this shit as he goes along, especially in this first season. There's no guidelines. So my overall thoughts of this episode is it's surprisingly good. Like it's much more interesting than you'd think of it. It's an episode that, although the premise of the Doctor talking to a colleague, and it's sort of like Data's day, sort of telling a story of what his day's like, this is a unique story to Enterprise, because only Enterprise could come up in this situation without the rules or the established way of handling things, because it's so early in Starfleet history and they haven't made up all the rules. So it's a very, while old way of doing things, it is very uniquely Enterprise. And that's the thing I enjoy the most, when this show goes uniquely Enterprise. I definitely one of the better episodes of the season. I'd love to know what you think. Write it down in the comments. I have been TrekTrav. Make sure to check back very soon. I upload pretty much 3 times a week at this point, and I will see you again.